Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of B-Sides. I'm Pastor Jon, and I'm here with my red plaid brother, flannel, bearded, glasses, Rusten.
Hey!
I just noticed we're both wearing red, although your red is way newer than mine.
Oh, yeah, well, I don't know how new it is, but it's definitely retained a lot of depth over the years.
Somebody gave this to me a couple years ago, and you know how like when you wash flannel, it just
Fades.
It gets less and less and less red. It's so warm though, and I like it. But
you've had that flannel for a long time.
A long time. I tend to have clothes for a long time.
Same.
I have a green army jacket that I've been preaching in for probably 14 years.
Yep.
I think I'm just a cheapskate.
Hey, if it's still, it's not frayed and breaking apart.
No, it still works. So it was an Old Navy special. Anywho, how are you doing?
Doing good. It's it's that time of year where you're making the fire every day. The house is super cozy.
Oh man, that's right. You guys have a fireplace.
Yeah, it is just when at nighttime when we turn the lights off and it's just the Christmas tree lit up and the fire's going and you sit down for a second. It's like, this is the best.
Yeah. Yeah. We had in our last house, we had a fireplace and it was awesome. And in our new house, we have a chimney, but it's hidden in a wall. And so part of me is like, I want to do a remodel at some point and put a fireplace in there because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
They smell great. If you lose the power, you got heat.
Yes.
But there is something very different about wood stove heat versus gas stove heat. And wood stove heat it's like a dry, it dries things out like in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
It's intense in a way that the gas isn't.
Yes.
I always describe it to Brenna as it's like having the sunshine in your house.
Yeah.
Like when the sun is just beating down, you're like, oh man, that's intense. Right.
Yeah.
But like on a cold day when you come inside, it's like, oh, the sunshine is, in here, but it's in the wood stove. It's like amazing. That intensity. Yeah.
So we weren't supposed to talk about this, but when do you get your wood? Do you chop every summer?
I try to get it going every summer. Sometimes I get enough wood where I haven't had to do it some years, but I was behind this year. I was like, oh man, late summer, I need wood stat. And so I asked some people around and had two friends actually drop off wood on my property, like the guys who have businesses. And like when I put out hey, does anybody have any wood, that they'd be willing for me to come and pick up and take. And these guys just like, hey, I just cleared a lot. I can actually bring the dump truck over and just dump it in your yard. And so I had two different guys do that. And I was like, this is amazing.
That's awesome.
I can thank Steve Hoyt was one of those guys, as was Austin. What's his last name? Abigail and Austin.
Yes.
Why is the last name escaping me? So firewood man. He was already picking up firewood for his firewood business. And for some reason, the last episode you had mentioned Austin Powers. And because of that, I cannot get the Overton, yeah. So
okay. Well, the reason I was struggling with that is because I'm a motocross guy, and there's an Austin Faulkner who races. And when you said Austin, Faulkner came to my mind, and then I'm like, I know it's not that. I know Austin. And I got his business card for the little side, the business he's got on the side, which I think is still on the side, right?
Yeah. And he's got a great little wood business that you can pick up wood from his little stand he has.
Oh, that's right.
So yeah, definitely recommend if you need firewood, go into the Overton's.
Overton
wood.
Is it
Woods.
Overton Landscaping? Overton Enterprise? Overton.
I can't remember what his little business is, but the name of the actual business I think he got some equipment, so he started doing some stuff on the side. But his wood thing has always been a different thing on the side. He's always had a stand outside. It's really cool. It's a cool business, little small business. He's done well with.
Good. We'll go get your firewood from Overton's.
Yes.
Awesome. I wish I could remember his name of his business right now. But anyways, enough about firewood. On to a different fire.
Yes.
Yeah. So strange fire. Yeah. John MacArthur. Exodus 32 is probably the most funny chapter in Exodus, maybe all of Exodus at this point. I remember when you read it, the congregation laughed out loud.
Yes.
Both when you were reading the text before and then when you kind of reread it with a little bit more accent.
Yes.
So I want to talk about that, but I want to step back and set it up a little bit, because we've talked a lot about patterns in Genesis and the days. And one of the things that's really helpful in terms of understanding the main narrative of Scripture is to identify the patterns and then to realize when you're in a pattern and what it means, because there's all sorts of meaning that's associated with that. So just real briefly, we've had the days of creation, and then God said, we've had those 7 things that have happened. All the previous B-sides have dealt with that.
Ending on Sabbath.
Ending on Sabbath, yeah. And so when you're reading Genesis, after the 6th day, which comes in Genesis 1 and then is kind of narrowly focused in on Genesis 2, the next thing that happens in Genesis is sin. It's the fall. So you have this order of creation, rest, and then you have fall. Okay.
Yeah.
Then you fast forward a little bit. You have Noah and his family. You have the flood. There is a judgment that comes. After that judgment, there's a new beginning. Like the slate is kind of wiped clean. You have Noah and his family. You have Noah. It's raining for 40 days. You have the symbolism of Moses being up on the mountain with God for 40 days. When he comes down, it's like the waters have parted, new creation time. But when Noah comes out, he builds an altar, an altar to the Lord. And God reaffirms the cultural mandate, the exact same mandate that he gives to Adam in Genesis 1, the only exception being that Noah is told to go ahead and use the animals for food. And there's some debate on whether that's
Thank
new.
God.
Yeah. Thank the Lord. So you've got this new creation, this new thing starting, and the next chapter is the fall. So if we're identifying that rhythm of creation fall and creation fall, when we get to the end of the tabernacle narrative and you have the 7 days that follow Genesis, the next thing we should expect, well, what always happens when God starts over with people? The fall, right?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, Exodus 32 is the fall narrative coming right on the heels of the Sabbath, just like Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah.
So that tells us a lot of things. It's a repeat of the pattern. It tells us where we're at in the story. It also seems to I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
Why is it important? What does it mean that fall comes right on the heels of all these instructions God has given us? What does that mean?
Well, on one side of things, I mean, there's a sense in which we've said this all along in Exodus, but it's not just about what happened; it's about what happens. Like there's patterns that kind of indicate there's something about our problem as humans, right? And fallen humans is that we cannot achieve what we need on our own. We actually need God's sovereign grace, and so that's one of the things that means. And just the fact that the pattern reoccurs. And this, to get more specific, I'd say that at this point in the narrative, it's saying loud and clear, we still have an Adam problem. Right? Aaron is not going to solve the Adam problem.
Yeah.
The ministry that Aaron has, and the clothing and all that he's representing is pointing to something that will solve the Adam problem. But Aaron himself cannot solve the Adam problem. Christ solves the Adam problem. So that repetition continues up until Jesus' ministry. Right. You have, I think we talked about this in the past, but, whenever I think of 40 days, I also think about Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Right. Like Jesus goes through the waters. He has this, there's this kind of even new creation picture in his baptism that the Spirit rests upon him. Right. And then he goes through the waters, and it's kind of by being baptized. Right. And then he is driven by the Spirit. Right. We talk about the Spirit, coming upon the Bezalel and Oholiab for the sake of a task, right? So he's driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, and in the wilderness he is there for 40 days fasting, just like Moses was, and he's being tempted, right, in a state of humiliation, And Jesus in that wilderness temptation reveals he does not have the same problem as Aaron or even Moses later. I mean, Moses in this particular chapter, I think, is a picture. It's a picture of what Christ came to do. But Moses later reveals he's also not the answer.
Yeah. It's really striking to think while you're talking about it, I'm thinking about all these things that Israel had witnessed, and we're like weeks removed, right? It's not like this is years after the Exodus event. You're weeks removed from being in Egypt, seeing the plagues.
Yeah.
God confronts all these false gods, destroys them, liberates you. You plunder the Egyptians. The Red Sea parts. I think you said this was really good. The taste of manna was still in their mouth. Right?
Yes,
you said that. I'm like, this is really fresh. Like this just happened yesterday, and they still have a problem, which is screaming that you have an Adam problem that Aaron can't fix. It's also screaming you have a Pharaoh problem still. And I think one of the things I remember you saying before is like, there's two slaveries. There's the outside Pharaoh, which is Egypt. There's this inner Pharaoh that went through the Red Sea with the Israelites. That Pharaoh needs to be conquered.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the Pharaoh that's actually the worst of the two. Yes. Because you can live in Egypt as a slave and still be free in God, but you can also be free out of Egypt and still be a slave to sin.
Yeah, and many of the generation that escaped Egypt do so to only get overthrown by that Pharaoh, right? That rebellious Pharaoh in the wilderness. Like what numbers when a large, that whole generation gets judged in the wilderness. Right. It's their kids that have to pick it up from there.
Yeah,
Yep. It's so that is the more dangerous Pharaoh of the pharaohs for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. So right out of the gate, I mean, even think about the mountain. It's almost like the smell of smoke is still in their nostrils. They can still see
that. Yeah, there's still this fiery flame and smoke on the mountain. They literally that day had eaten manna. Like that's what they're living on.
Yeah,
and it's like, hey, we don't know what happened to Moses and his God.
We don't know about this guy.
We don't know about this God. Can you make us gods, Aaron?
Yeah. Which is, and that's not even the part that's even that funny. We'll get to that in a moment. But it just reveals how deceptive sin is. That you can literally still have some of the salt on your skin from the waters that you just walked through. That you literally with your own eyes saw God part from you, or part for you, and your heart can still wander like that.
It's really a testament to our, a lot of Reform guys talk about our complete inability, right? Our complete inability, and that's like kind of what's being referenced with total depravity as well. But like our complete inability to on our own come to Christ, because there's rebellion in our hearts, but also just like we're completely blind to it by our sin.
Yeah. And it also seems to be saying very, very, very early, right out of the gates, that, when Moses is going up and down, he's speaking to the people and it says, we will do all that you have said, right?
Yeah.
And there's this covenant. Yes. And from the very beginning, it's very clear the covenant's not enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There needs to be a better covenant, because from day one, they're already turning and forgetting who God is and what he's done. And so the way that they do that is interesting. They want something, right? They want an image. They want this bull to be made, this representative. Why do you think that is?
Well, the reason they give is because Moses has been gone for so long. So there are some who look at that and say, Moses had kind of been for them. I mean, and this makes sense in light of what God tells us about Moses. Like you will be as God to these people, right? Like you will speak and it will be like God speaking, right? So when Moses is gone, it's almost as though they've lost their representation of God. And so they are that's the temptation. And there's an impatience there. There's a lot of things going on there, but they want now, because they don't know what's happened to him on their own admission. There's fear, there's anxiety, and they want a representation, and they want it now. Right. And so there's a kind of like, we want this thing that gives us confirmation that God is with us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is one of the things I talked about in the sermon, is that they don't need that thing to get confirmation that God was with them. Like they have all the things that have happened in the past, and they have things that happened that very day. That's the hilarity of, like, well, the tragic hilarity of the, they had the taste of manna on their mouth. That was a representation of God's presence with them.
Yeah.
The fire that they could still see on the mount, that was a representation of God's being with them. And so there's a blindness to the very things in front of them. And one of the things I said is that this is one of the things that idolatry does, is it tries to find solutions to problems that God has already solved.
Yes.
Right. And
that was great.
And and you see that, because like all the things that their heart is saying, we need something. It's just right there.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Like in ways that, like, we can't even imagine how clear it would have been, but at the same time, they're still blind to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same thing that's happening in Genesis 3, where the serpent is like, oh, you will be like God. And it's like, there's nothing more like God in all of creation than Adam and Eve.
Exactly.
Right. They're made in his image.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was, in the crafting of the sermon, I had a whole couple paragraphs comparing this to Adam and Eve falling into the trap of, like, you'll be like gods.
Yeah.
It's like they already are like God. They like, because it's the exact same kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, you already have something, but I'm going to tell you don't have it. And then I'm going to, with that lie, tempt you into this substitute.
Yeah. And it's always the same lie.
Yeah. God doesn't love you.
Yeah. It's repackaged, but
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So good. Okay, so they wanna have this calf made. So then Aaron goes ahead and does this, which is also comical, because Aaron had a front row seat to all of the encounters with Pharaoh as Moses' right hand man. So here he is now. He's building this calf, and there's an interesting. There was something that you pointed out that was really good. You have the golden calf, and I think you asked, where did that gold come from?
Yes, exactly.
Right? And that was important to note that. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So it explicitly says that he asked for the earrings that are on the wives, the daughters, and the sons. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you go back in the Exodus story, twice this jewelry that's given to the wives, the daughters, and the sons is mentioned. And it's when first it's when God's saying, when you leave, you're going to ask the Egyptians, and then it repeats itself, because when they actually leave, they do this, right? They ask the Egyptians. The women go and ask the Egyptian people for their gold, and they give it to them. They give them and it says they gave them silver and gold, and they put that on their, on the wives, on the daughters, and on the sons. So the earrings that they had were jewelry that they had received from, and we don't know that it's like all of this gold came from Egypt, whatever. But like, we do know that the only time we have jewelry being put on the wives, the daughters, and sons is specifically related to this gift given to them, that God says, I will cause you. So it's God's initiation that is going to cause the Egyptians to have favor on the Israelites and give them a parting gift of this jewelry in there that is, if you believe that's what's going on here, it's the earrings, right? So they are tokens of God's favor given to them in this hilarious kind of like, okay, yeah, you want gold? Sure, here you go. Like,
here you go.
And this, and I just love the way that God tells them this is like, in this way you will loot the Egyptians. They will give you their gold, right? So, which I think is just a testament to the miracle of, like, it wasn't by forces, because God gave them favor. Yeah. So those earrings are gifts. They're gifts from God, and that's, again, another. If we were talking, like I talked about how this is something idolatry always does. One of the things is it looks for solutions that God's already provided for. But another thing is that idolatry always abuses God's gifts.
Yeah.
It takes something God has given and it uses it in rebellion against him. These were gifts from God. They were tokens of his grace, and they get given to Aaron to forge into an adulterous image of worship, right? And this is true you could kind of find the details of how this works out in your life all the time, but I emphasize the most basic way this happens. No matter what your sinning is, it's like you have to have breath to live. Your breath is a gift from God. And every time you're sinning, you're using that breath in rebellion against him. So all of your sinning is dependent upon like taking his gifts and using them against him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. The idolatry sin is taking God's gifts and then using them against him, or failing to acknowledge him as the giver.
Yes.
Not being thankful for it. When you hear about all this gold, part of me is like, I wonder if that was like part of the plan for all of the gold in the tabernacle. That was like part of that looting was, hey, this is actually going to go to building God's house, and instead they're building this calf. The other thing that popped up, I was thinking when you just mentioned that, was that in Timothy, there's another form of idolatry, which is not just using God's gifts against him or failing to give thanks to him, but it's also calling his gifts bad. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like certain foods and drinks are bad, and even marriage being bad. And if I remember right, Paul calls it the doctrines of demons.
Yes.
To take gifts that God gives to his people to be enjoyed with gratitude, and to say that those things are bad. Because what you're saying when you do that is that you have a higher standard of righteousness and holiness than God does.
Yeah. There's I've seen this tendency live in the church, and I've even experienced this tendency in my own heart, that you think that the way to avoid idolatry is to like spurn his gifts, right?
Yes.
I'm really nervous about enjoying this thing because I don't want to fall into idolatry. It's like, well, the way to actually not fall into idolatry is not to run away from his gifts. It's to actually give thanks to him for them.
Yeah.
And that, the giving thanks to God is actually how you kill idolatry.
Absolutely.
And so that means Christians ought to have a very high view of his gifts, right? But also, see them as properly ordered under his kindness, under his lordship, under his rule and reign.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's super important, because I think that when you kind of have like a skittish view of the gifts that God gives, like your wealth, your bank account, it's almost like it can be like a parent who is so worried about their kids, falling into drunkenness, that they're going to like hide their liquor under the bed and never, ever, ever like make it sound like, oh, we're teetotalers, but we really do enjoy drinking. We just don't want to do it in front of you because you're basically teaching your kids to think of this thing as only idolatrous.
Yeah.
Right. And there's that is like, you don't want to do that. You want to say all things should be received with thanksgiving and not abused by rebelling against God in them.
Yeah.
Like that's how you kill the idolatrous spirit. And you also, you have to root all those, gifts also in, it's not just that the Lord gave them to us, but he is also, as a Christian, there's something blood bought about all this stuff too.
Yes.
Like, because Christ came, died on the cross, rose again, not just to redeem souls, but to redeem the created order. Right. So there's, those things are connected too. So it's crucial to order the things, ordered affections. God is first. And the way that you actually do that practically is by giving thanks to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes maturity and self-control.
Yes.
To order. There has to be a self-mastery involved, because I think what sometimes people are afraid of is the abuses.
Yes.
And so the way to avoid the abuses is to avoid the gift, but that actually places the problem in the wrong spot.
Exactly.
The problem isn't in the thing. The problem is in here.
Yes.
And okay.
And there are some, just to kind of like make sure we're hitting on this too. Like there are some forms of self-control that are self-knowledgeable enough to know I cannot go there.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah, we should do a special episode just on this issue, because from time to time it comes up, and it'd be fun just to kind of go back and forth.
Yeah,
let's do that. We're gonna do that.
Yeah,
executive
I'm
decision.
Down.
Okay.
I'm down.
Great, we'll do that. Okay, so I want to move on to the next thing. So we talked about the kind of the anatomy of idolatry and sin. There's always this two-step thing that happens with sin. And you see it in Genesis 3. I spent a lot of time in Genesis 3 today because I'm preparing to preach from Ephesians 2 about Christ is our peace.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And when you look at the before and after in Ephesians 2, it almost perfectly parallels before and after Genesis 2, Genesis 3. It's really fascinating.
Interesting.
But there's always a two-step to sin. There's the first step, which is the sin itself. And then the second step, which is it's sometimes more destructive, is the way you respond to the sin.
Yeah,
it leads to more confusion. So, and that's where we get into the part of this text that's really funny, is that well, I'll let you say it. The way you said it was really funny on Sunday about Aaron. What?
Okay, yeah.
What's going on, Aaron?
So yeah, when Aaron gives his response to Moses, that's the part that everybody laughs at, because it's just, especially when you've read the first part of the chapter, it's just hilarious, because he's giving we've already been told how he makes the calf. He asks for the gold, he melts it down, and then it says he uses a tool to carve the thing. And if you know anything about how these things are done, you know that this is probably like a 4-day process.
This is not
like
quick.
Minimum. Yeah. Like just, the gathering it all, melting it all down, and then how long it takes to actually carve. And we don't know how big it was, but even if you're carving something not very substantial, right?
Yeah.
It takes time.
It takes
to carve metal. And even if it's something softer like gold, it just takes time to make it look like not like a 2-year-old art piece, right? So, but when Moses approaches him, he says, first off, I love the way he approaches him. He says, "What did the people do to you that you did this thing?"
Yeah, verse 20. What did this people do to you? You brought such a great sin upon them.
And it's like Moses is like looking at things and he goes, "Surely they must have done something terrible to you. Like, did they torture you?
Yeah.
Did they hold your head underwater? Did they lock up your kids and say, 'We want gods or else'? Like it should have been." And no, really what it was just the crowds. Like, it was the peer pressure of a mob mentality, right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so, when he gives his response to Moses, he says, "The people, them. They're evil. They're set in their ways. They asked for gods because you were gone, and I said, give me your gold." And even in the story, it's like, why did you ask for their gold? Like, that's just like, you're trying to say you're like, your hands are clean, but like, why did you ask for their gold in the first place? Like, and I put their gold in the fire, and out came this golden calf. Like, whammo! Like, and I said, whammo! Out came this golden calf. And there's one of the things I said is that it's a lot like, we've all seen this, especially if you're a parent. You see the kid who has the most just ridiculous excuse. Like, they got chocolate on their face, and you're like, "Did you eat the chocolate chip cookies?" "No, there's a monster in the closet who ate the cookies." So like that's how ridiculous.
While chocolate is smeared,
right, yes, all over your face. Exactly.
Yeah. No.
And so, I don't know, and one of the things we see in this response also is that it's very similar to Adam's response when Eve gives him the fruit. He's standing right next to her. He's just, he's under a kind of pressure from, I think that there's a reason that the serpent went after Eve. It's because through that allegiance, that relationship of love, Adam is conflicted. He doesn't want to stand opposed to his wife.
Yeah.
And so he is willing to go there with her because it's just it's less work to not oppose her. And, whatever. He's just going to go with her, right? And so but when he's caught by God, he says, "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate." Right, and so he blames her and God, and you actually see something similar here too, because when Aaron, is approached, he says, the people you left me with, and this miracle that the calf just comes out of the fire. It's like again, he's doing something similar. It's like if a calf just jumped out of the fire, like you're basically saying God did it, but we know he's lying in that regard. But there is a blame shifting. There is a refusal to take responsibility. There is all these things that are just reminiscent of and echoes of what Adam did.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's, you kind of wonder, I mean, you're speculating, but it's like, what if Adam had opposed Eve, just said, "Hey, honey, I can't do this. God told us not to do this. We need to go talk to him about this."
Yeah.
Like,
completely different story. Yeah.
How would it have been different? And I think this is what, I mean, part of the reason Aaron's story is so funny is because it's so much our story. Like, we do the same thing. We don't think that, we have chocolate chips on our face, but we do have proverbial chocolate chips on our face where we want to excuse our sin or blame it on somebody. And we come up with these stories that we think, make sense to us. Lo and behold, right? They gave it to me and I threw it into the fire and out came this calf.
Yeah.
And so then we start telling lies, and lies are always about protecting yourself.
Yes.
It's about self-justification. It redirects blame to everybody else. And then it just leads to more and more and more sin.
Yes.
Whereas the way that you deal with sin is by confessing it.
Exactly.
What if Aaron says, "You're right, Moses. It's not the people's fault. It's not the kiln's
I take responsibility.
Fault. Yes, I did this." Right?
Yes.
And it's a very, very different story.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do that. And I think there's a good lesson in terms of, like, it's easy to laugh at Aaron as the dumb guy, but we're all Aaron in this certain
all
sense,
the time. Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's somebody else's fault. The people are evil. It's my situation. I think you did a really good job of kind of identifying what some of those excuses that we come up with to justify our sin. Do you remember those? Could you?
Yeah. One of the things I said is, we have our list of excuses that are similar to this. And one of those things is, it's not sin. It's just my personality type.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm not a jerk. I'm not rude. I'm just a whatever I'm just a Enneagram 7.
Oh my God.
I don't even know what an Enneagram 7 is. I just know that that's one of those personality test things, right?
Yes,
so you're making excuses, or we could put it in some more popular terms. I was just born this way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Similar kind of a thing. Or, another one is everybody's doing this. It can't be that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're looking for justification outside by looking at how common this particular respectable sin is, whatever. And then the one that I think is like the hardest for people, because it's the easiest one to not see as an excuse, is you don't know the pain I've been through, the trauma, whatever it is, the hurt, like this sin is deeply related to that. And like, how dare you like question me on that? Like, and it becomes this excuse based upon hurt. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous forms, because it's the hardest one to recognize, because it requires that you forgive and you understand that that's sin.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those two things, that's just kind of like a, blaming other people. It's not their fault. It's my fault. And what we're doing, and I described it like we have all these things, our personality traits, our history, our pains, our hurts, and we just go, whammo, out of the fire came this golden calf, this idol. But if you do that, if you refuse to confess your sin, if you refuse to acknowledge and expose your sin, you'll never come to the freedom from it that comes from confessing and being forgiven. This reminds me of Romans and how Romans talks about, what does the law do? Like, the law makes everything in bondage to sin, right? And you need to be justified apart from the law, so that the law doesn't become the like provocation to sin, right?
Yeah.
And like when you are condemned by the law, right? It's like, well, what the heck? Might as well continue sinning, right? Like I have no savior outside of myself, and I'm condemned. So you start looking for saviors through this self-justification. But Christ came so that the righteousness of the law could be fulfilled in us, meaning we actually learn to walk away from sin.
Yep.
Because we've been forgiven and because we can confess it and know that there's an answer outside of ourselves that can make us righteous.
Yep.
And then you're not caught in this cycle of seeking self-justification.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned, maybe we can end with this because I think we're about time. Of the ways that people kind of justify their sin was, you said, if you knew how bad I was hurting inside.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like the judo excuse because like it kind of takes advantage of people's empathy or sympathy to go, like, this really hurts me. This is who I am. This is, and you have to be careful, one, not to justify yourself that way. But if you're on the flip side of that, like, what God calls us to be is not true to ourselves.
Exactly.
Or to react to our pain, which can be very real.
Yeah.
But to be true to him.
Yes.
And to respond to the grace that he's given us in Christ, which allows us to look at ourselves and our own stories and our own pain and to call it what it is and to see it for what it is, but also to confess of our sin and our idolatrous desires and to walk from it, and by his grace and the power of the Spirit to walk in obedience. Yeah. Instead of remaining in that self-justifying sin.
Yeah. And I think that there can be a bitterness towards other people that makes you like they've done something to you, so like I'm going to be living sinfully against them and justify that because of what they've done to me. But then on the other side, you can do the same thing to God, right? Like they're like God has let these things happen. I'm kind of like my sinful response is just like par for the course given what he's allowed me to go through. And there's a kind of like bitterness that can set in against God. And I think that that's one of the things, if you look at history is a big mess, but if you look at it, one of the things you often see is that the people who are some of the greatest villains are the people who are hurt the most. Right. Yeah. And so there's a bit of a parable there for us, which is this pernicious, like you can almost see Satan talking into the ear, like you'll get them back, or like how dare God, or how dare they, right? And how that that just flows right into his plan to lead humanity into being God hating and destructive to other image bearers, right? So there's when I taught through James, one of the things I said throughout that whole series is that persecutions are both wonderful opportunities to witness to the glory of God, but they're also incredible temptations to a different kind of sin.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like when you experience something and that's one of the things that James is warning that church about, like you are experiencing a lot of horrific things, and you are going to be tempted in this way, right? Because of the persecution. So you need to cling to God. You remember He's the Father of lights. Don't think that God is tempting you. Like God does not tempt anyone, right? There's this why would He say that? Well, because there's a temptation you have to think God is He's the reason I'm feeling bitter. Like you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So yeah, but it is a tender thing, right? And so, but I think pastors need to tenderly walk people who are dealing with that stuff through it, right? But I think that it's crucial for people to understand, like in just clear terms, it is poisonous. Yeah. And
maybe we can end with this. It's like this is a good reminder that if you're in sin, if you're struggling with sin, if you've given in to sin, don't don't believe the lie
that
you can lie your way out of it. That the way out is always speaking truthfully. It's always owning it. It's confessing it. And that's how you're actually liberated from it. Right.
Yep.
And, we're getting ready to celebrate the second week of Advent, which is peace.
Yeah.
Right? We were far from God. We were alienated. We were separated, but Christ himself is our peace. That's why we can talk to God truthfully about our sin.
Yeah.
Because Christ came to be judged in our place so that we could be embraced as brothers and sisters. And
absolutely.
So if you're watching this today, and you're in sin, talk to a pastor. There is grace, there is forgiveness. If you don't go to our church, talk to your pastor. If you go to our church, come up after Sunday. We're up there all the time.
Yeah.
Come talk to us. And that's the way to freedom. That's the way out is talking truthfully. So,
amen.
Should we end it with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
A hearty Merry Christmas. You want to send us out?
Yeah. Everybody, Merry Christmas. Thanks for listening to Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. Peace.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.